Yep.
We are up to Daf Tes Vav Amid Aleph. We're still having the argument, and we're trying to prove one way or another that Shlakish and Rav says that even though Shammai had his opinion, he did not carry them through, and Rabbi Yochanan says he did. So each time we brought a proof one way or another, we sort of interpreted that you can learn a different way as well. So the Gemara now continues. Tashma coming here. This is about the Tes Vav Amid Aleph, about 10 lines from the top of the page. Toshba coming here. The Amr of Tarfin made the following comment to Avni. Tarfin was a student of Beis Shammai. He says to Avni, "Oh, I have such a taiva, such a desire. Mosai tovei tzoras habasli." I wish I had an instance where my daughter was married to my brother, and then there's a question of the co-wife, so I can prove. I say, and I will marry her because I want to follow the words of my rabbi. That is so unique. So it's clearly from the wording that he said that if he has a situation, he would marry you. In other words, Beis Shammai would carry through on their opinion. Says the Gemara again, the Shlokish says no proof. Ema, let's say va'asi, and on the contrary, what he's saying is, I would like to have such a thing. And he said, I will marry you off to somebody else because I hold like Beis Hillel, but you're not allowed to marry. Not that I will marry her, but rather that I will marry up somebody else. Says the Gemara, it says, I have this strong desire. So what he meant was, what's a big taiva? If he doesn't have anything, he doesn't benefit from it. What's the taiva? He wants to prove that Yochanan Nuri wrong. Yochanan tried to come up with his remedy that every single such tzara should get a chalitza, and therefore everyone is happy. I want to prove him wrong that according to Hill, you don't have to do anything, and therefore I would have done that. I wish I have a taiva that I have a chance to prove that. Says the Gemara. Continue bring different stories to prove that they actually carried out their thoughts. There's a story Rabbi Gamliel had a brother whose name was Abba. So Rabbi Gamliel's daughter was married to his brother Abba. And then his brother died childless. So obviously Rabbi Gamliel now is confronted with his daughter as his sister-in-law. The Yibim and he actually Rabbi Gamliel went ahead and married the Tzara. Seems clear from here that Rabbi Gamliel followed Beis Shammai and acted on it, and he married the tzara of his daughter. Now, this is very problematic because Rabbi Gamliel was from the family of Hillel, but he would forget about being, that the halachas like Hillel. He's from the family of Hillel, and he would go against his own family. V'tizbra, Rabbi Gamliel, Mitamid Beis Shammai, he was a pastor. Gamliel was a student of Beis Shammai. He's a grandson of Hillel. So what story? The story is different. The island is Hava. She was an islandess. And we paskin before, we had different discussion, but we paskin before that even though she was an islandess, and Rabbi Yochanan said, even though that the husband knew about it from the beginning, her tzara is permitted. Not that it's us. Remember, we tried to say there's a difference if it was a mistake, then the Becker tells, but if you knew, then it's a marriage and the tzara is forbidden. And Rabbi Yochanan said, no, regardless, it's always permitted, as if she was never married as far as Yibam, because since there's no mitzvah of Yibam there whatsoever, because she can never have children, therefore the tzara is permitted. And that's what Gamliel did. His daughter happened to be an islandess. Says the Gemara, Sefer, it says in the Sefer, it says over there in the Sefer of the Brisa that there are others who understand that the daughter of Gamliel was an islandess, which means the first opinion was that the daughter was not an islandess, and Gamliel still married the tzara, like Beis Shammai. Because she wasn't an islandess. Says Gemara, no. The difference between the two opinions of the Brisa are hikaba v'lo hikaba ikabenayu. The difference is the difference as follows. The Acherim hold that even though the according to Tanakama is because the whole thing was a mistake. Because the whole thing was a mistake, the marriage was a mistake, according to Tanakama, and therefore, as if she wasn't married, and that's why you're allowed to marry the tzara. And the Acherim say, no, we don't care if you knew about it, didn't know about it. The tzara doesn't, the island doesn't count because it can never be a mitzvah of Yibam, therefore the tzara is permitted in that case. And we'll marry the tzara. When Milton Aleph will continue the discussion as to when Beis Shammai has an opinion, did they actually act on it, like Rabbi Yochanan says, or they didn't act on it like Shlakish says. We're trying to bring different proofs of different stories that they did, and each time we're rejecting, saying no proof. Or Igboy Sema, or another version of this story. What happened here was that Gamliel had a brother called Abba, and married to Rabbi Gamliel's daughter, and then when Abba died childless, Rabbi Gamliel married his tzara. And we want to know how. That's Beis Shammai, not Beis Hillel. And the Gemara wanted to prove that they acted on Beishamai's words. The Gemara says impossible. How could he follow Beishamai? So we explained his daughter was an idleness, according to both opinions in the Brisa. Another way of explaining is that we had before an argument when we say that if the erva, let's say, was divorced, does it have to be when the brother died childless, there was no erva there anymore, then the tzara is permitted. So we have two opinions. One opinion is that they couldn't even overlap, that the tzara, that the woman who was divorced, the erva was divorced, was before Reuben, the first brother, the one that eventually died, married her, so they never overlapped. Therefore, that tzara is permitted. And the other opinion says no, even they overlapped. The main thing is the juncture is when Reuben died, were they still co-wives or not? We had before, Abimir explained, is it the moment of death that creates the Yibum, or is the moment that they married in the first place that creates the potential for Yibum? And that's the argument between the Tanakama and the second one. Another difference between two opinions in the Brisa. Or and Viboy said, no, but even with an idleness, that's what they're arguing about. Can they overlap or not? Viboy said, another thing is, yes, tonight, bebiya ika benayu. Another thing is, let's say you married a woman and you said on the condition that you have no major flaws on your body that I cannot see right now, or you don't have any vows that you've made that will actually affect our marriage, like you won't eat any meat to make our marriage very difficult, things like that. And then turned out to be they got married and found out, yeah, she did have vows, just didn't disclose them. And the question is, and it's a mekach the whole thing then. So Rabbi Gamliel's brother Abba made such a tanai with his daughter, and turned out to be that she had woman, and therefore technically she wasn't really the wife of Abba. Rabbi Gamliel's daughter is not the wife because she didn't fulfill the tanai that he made. So the Tanakhama says the reason why they're able to marry is the reason why they were able to marry according to this version is because he made a tanai with her and the tanai didn't fulfill, and therefore it's as if they were never married. The second opinion holds no, that's not good enough, because they hold that even though you made it tonight, but that's not something. At the moment you had marital relations, we assume that you're meichel all these tanaim, and we have to give another reason because of an illness. Okay. Or, like we said before, the Tanakhama holds that even if they overlap, as long as when they died, as long as when they died, there's no longer the wife, and this Achedim hold no, that if they overlap, it's too late already. The only reason why it wasn't a problem is because she was an Alice. Talking about it further, okay, so we have no proof one way or another. That's another question. There was a story about Akiva. There's an argument with Besham and Basil. When exactly does a new year for trees come about? Besham says we had no Sham. Besham said it's Echa B'Shvat. Basil said the 15th day of Shvat. Came along Rabbi Akiva and said, and the difference is whether because the first and second year you give Meiser Sheni, the third year is Meiser Oni. So Meiser Rabbi Akiva Shaliket Esrig Be'Ech B'Shvat. He collected an esrig on the first day of Shvat. The Noig by Beizesur, and he gave the two different kinds of Meiser. He wasn't sure if this is considered the third year because Ech B'Shvat B'Shamai says is the new year, therefore it's Meiser Oni, or maybe it's the second year because Tu B'Shvat is when the year turns over, and if the second year you have to give Meiser Sheni. So what did he do was he gave both Meisers. Ech Kediv B'Shamai, Ech Kediv B'Sil. So doesn't that prove clearly that they used to act on their opinions, and therefore he followed both opinions? Says he want to know. He didn't follow all opinions. He did not know for certain who's the one that says Echad B'Shvat is the new year. Was it Beishamai or was it actually Beis Hillel? He wasn't sure if it was Tu B'Shvat or whether it was Echad B'Shvat, and that's why he was Machmir and he did both. Says the Gemara, that's another question. Again, so it doesn't prove that Beshamai, the halacha is not like Beshamai, we actually carried out Beshamai's opinion. Next question. We look more Sukkah. So the story that Yoldosa Kalose Shel Shamai Hazok, and we hold that the mitzvah chidduv starts when the kid doesn't need his mother anymore, but Beshamai holds that even as soon as the kid is born, so his daughter or his daughter-in-law gave birth to a grandchild. So they opened the roof above the grandchild's head on his crib, and on his cot, and he played schachre b'shvil cotton for his kid. So we see clearly that it's an opinion, and they acted on it. Shema mina osu. it's a bit difficult to understand because all he's doing is being machmer. Even though we say that you can't, that you don't have to, whether the Reb Shammai acted or not. They were talking about where if you acted according to the opinion, it's wrong in Hillel's eyes. But here you think Hillel cares if you made a sukkah for your kid and you want to be machmer. What's the big deal? Let's say you did us in this case. So what? What does it have to do? How does that reflect in all the other cases where according to Beis Hillel what Beis Shammai is doing is wrong? So then Beis Shammai didn't act. That's the whole discussion. But if Beis Hillel says you want to make a sukkah, fine. That doesn't matter. You just don't need to. So what's the big deal? Not sure. Hassan says no. The reason why Beis Shammai did it is because he had no issue. Because the one who sees it says La Fushe Avikavir. He's just doing it to give more air to his grandsons. It doesn't look like he's defying Hillel's, that he's going against Hillel. Moshe Mazut, there's another question. There's a story. There's a story where they had this rock. This rock was hollow inside, and it had gathered water from the mountain, but it was not enough. It wasn't 40 saw. It wasn't 40 saw, which is sufficient for a mikveh. So there was a hole on the side of the rock. We learned before the concept of hashaka, where it connects to another mikveh, and next to it was a mikveh, according to Moshe Sheni, where Rashi next to it was a spring, and therefore, because of the hole, it was wide enough to put a hollow tube, which two fingers can go in and out. It can turn around. That revolve in that we say that the circumference is wide enough. It connects the two waters, and the water in that rock is kosher. So Maisa b'shoikas yehu shahoyse b'shleim, that was in shleim. Hoyse the kugel, the mikveh, it was a hole that is attached to a proper mikveh. The chol tares shahoye b'shleim, and all the tares, the many shleim nasim al gabel. They made it on top of this rock. Even though the rock itself didn't have 40 saw, but it was connected through that hole to a mikveh that had 40 saw. And Beis Shammai holds that shveiferes hanoid, which is what a tube can be put in, is not wide enough. You need to make a much wider hole, and the majority of it should have a hole so that the water can connect. So the Sholcha Beis Shammai went along, and he broadened the hole, expanded the hole. So we see that Beis Shammai actually carried out his words. Same question as before. Why can't you say you just machmer? Does Beis Hillel care if it's a greater than shveiferes hanoid? He just says that the minimum size is shveiferes hanoid for the waters to connect. Yet the Gemara seems to learn that if we hold that loy asu, even if it's a chumrah, it's wrong, because then people will think that the halacha is like Beis Shammai. When it comes to other things, they're going to follow Beis Shammai as well, even though they're according to Beis Hillel, it's wrong. That's what it seems from the Gemara here. We need a hole that the majority of it. But now we learned. Aid of mikvahs according to Beis Hillel, when you want to mix two mikvahs together, kishveiferes hanoid, you need the size of a hollow tube. The chalol and the thickness is kishtei's boy is chayzul mekayman. Two fingers go back and forth. Shema mina asu. So it doesn't approve that Beis Shammai actually carried out his opinion. So again, no proof. Hassam over there, we're worried that people will say halacha Beis Shammai. In that case, we're not worried at all. Why? Because people can learn. You know why they made the hole bigger? Not because halachically they need it. It's practically. You have a bigger hole, more water comes in, and this way you're guaranteed that it'll always be connected. The water in the stone and the water outside. Doesn't prove anything. Toshma, coming here again. So we have no proof either way whether Beis Shammai acted on his view or not. And if he did act on his view, it's only because nobody would have realized that he's acting on his view. It's not against Beis Hillel, just a chumrah, and nobody realizes he's acting on his own view. Maybe he wants more air for the kid, or maybe he wants to make a bigger hole so more water can come in. Tashma Kabnid, I'm going to Tzaddik. Tzaddik said, when I used to learn Torah, by Rabbi Yochanan HaChoni, I saw he was eating pascharei melech that he couldn't afford or didn't have money. He only had his dry bread and dipped in a salt. B'shnei said it was a hunger year. So Bossi, I went. His Abba. I told my father, Rab Tzaddik, but my Rebbe, he has on to eat. Amalí said to me, go take these olives that was inside an earthen pot and bring it to him. And I brought it to him. He noticed that the olives are moist. In order for food to become prepared to be kabel tumah, it has to be moist. He noticed the olives are moist, and he was worried that even though if he touched the outside of a klei cheres, it doesn't become tamei. But we worried that maybe, but if an amaris touched it, the Rabbanan said even the outside klei cheres, if an amaris touched it, it does become what's inside. Or like other Rishonim, or other Rishonim learn that maybe he put his hand inside. Somebody tell me, put his hand inside, because now that the olives are moist, the muchshel lekabel tumah. Amalisa, my Rebbe Yochanan said, I'm not eating olives. Bossi, I didn't understand why. I told my father, Amali, He said to me, and my father said, I understand why he's not eating it. He's being machmir, or he thinks that it's tummy. Leichle Emeloi, tell him that Chavis Nekuva, tell him that this barrel had a hole, which means that even though it got moist, I never wanted, when is it Mukhsal Kabatum if it became moist on its own, if I'm happy that it became moist? I never wanted. There were holes in the bottom of this jug, and all the oil, all that juice that was coming out was dripping right down, which means I didn't want it. But then what happened was, Elisha says, that the pieces there filled the holes and therefore stopped falling out. But the fact that it had holes in the beginning proves, or that shows, demonstrates I'm not happy. I don't want that juice. So therefore, I'm not nichel, I'm not happy. And the olives never became prepared to mekabel tumah. I'm not happy with the wetness. But now we learned that you have a barrel of olives that are wheeled. The Shammai says, ain't you don't even need to make a hole. The scrambled. Let's say you have a bunch of things, let's say olives that are scrambled and pressing against each other. You don't need a hole. Why? Because he says the initial juice, when you have olives sitting next to each other, a little bit of juice comes out. That first juice is not oil. That's pure, moisture. That's nothing to do with oil, and therefore it doesn't prepare. It's sorry. The first, he said, the first oil thing that comes out is called maypedas, and maypedas are not from the 7 different liquids that prepare some mekabel, and therefore they are not machshel mekabel. Doesn't matter. And Basil says, Basil says, no, you do have to make a puncture, because he says that even this juice that comes out is no different than oil, and therefore it could prepare the olives tumah. But everyone agrees, if you made sure you put it into a jug that had holes, or you punctured holes, and therefore you demonstrate that you're not interested in any of this liquid, this tamur shmorim, and then it got sealed by the sediment, by pieces, she told is told, because you've demonstrated you're not interested. So the afapi, and even though shetalmid shaimah, and says in the Bryce as follows, even though Rabbi Yochanan Achorni was a student of Shammai, Kol Ma'asav, whatever he did, like us, he followed Basil, so he made sure he made a puncture. Tzaddik, so he made sure he made a puncture, and why? To be according to Bisham, you don't have to make a puncture in the barrel. So Tzaddik was a Talmud of Bisham. According to Rabbi Bisham, you have to make a puncture, because if it came out on someone being spushed, it doesn't matter. It's only according to the Basil that you have to make a puncture, and Rabbi Tzaddik went out of his way to make a puncture in the barrel. So we see clear from here that and the Bryce is a chiddush that he didn't follow Shammai, he followed Hill. Now, also that generally speaking, that the Talmidim of Shammai followed Shammai, they didn't do like Hillel, and I understand the chiddush that even though Rav Tzaddik was a Talmud of Shammai, he decided to follow Basil and make a puncture of the barrel. That's a chiddush. You can tell me they always follow Basil, that they never carried out their own opinion, so they always would have made a puncture. So Ma'ir was what's a chiddush. So that's Gemara being finally a proof must be also that they carried out their opinion. But over here, what do you see by also? Also, again, you see that all we know so far is that they follow Beis Hillel when it's a chumrah. Beis Hillel is machmer over Beis Shammai. He said make a puncture, so they did what he did. So therefore, they accommodated the chumrah of Beis Hillel. Doesn't prove yet that they also did the kula of Beis Hillel against Beis Shammai. We'll have to see it later. But here you see also a case of Tumah where Beis Shammai is the one who was lenient and Beis Hillel is the one who was machmer. And that's what we learned in the Gemara before about Beis Shammai being the 8 Tumas and the Taras of Hillel, because here in our Gemara, Beis Shammai is lenient on Tumah. Tashma coming in. Another proof trying to bring. Sholus, I'm sure that's a question. Tzara Sabas Mao, tell us, what do you think? The tzara of your daughter, Shimon and Reuben. Reuben and Shimon's daughter married Reuben. And then Reuben died childless. The tzara of that wife. What happens? Can you marry Shimon? He told them, they said to him, well, it's a machlekes Shammai Hill. So they asked him, Allah given me. Who's Allah like? He said to the following. Why are you forcing me to place my head between these 2 mammoth mountains, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, between these 2 people, these 2 groups that are arguing with each other, Bein Beis Shammai or Bein Beis Hillel. I'm scared if I voice my opinion, Shema Yoroitzi Gilgalti. They'll crush my head, because if I paskin like Beis Hillel, and then the students of Beis Shammai follow Shammai, so the tzara of the erva, they married to the yavam. According to Beis Hillel, the child produces a mamzer. If I say the halacha like Beis Hillel, it means Beis Shammai's families have mamzer amongst them. They're going to kill me for that. By saying those words, it's clear that the Beis Shammai family continued to behave like Beis Shammai. And here we're talking about even Lakula, they went against Beis Hillel, even though it comes at a cost. It's not just being machmer. because now the children might be mamzerim kol besil. Oh, he said one thing I could tell you is, I will tell you. Our state mishpachas the two large families. Shehayim b'Yerushalayim, mishpachas based tzvuim ben Achmoi and mishpachas based Kapoyim ben Mekoshes. These two families, these noted families, shehem bnei Tzaris, they were children of Tzaris. Umehem of Tzaris, and mehem koyanim gedolim. Amongst them were koyanim gedolim, and v'shim shugam mizbeach. They were koyanim, not just koyanim. They were koyanim gedolim, and they served on the mizbeach. So I can tell you that the children of Tzaris were working the Beis Hamikdash. Now, that's the common days. Now we're trying to analyze what happened. You tell me that each one did what they passed, and B'Shamai continued following their own opinion. You can understand why he was frightened, intimidated by them, because he'll label them mamzerim, and they are going to crush his brain for calling them mamzerim. Because according to Beis Hillel, the tzara of Achais is not in mitzvah yibum. She has to marry somebody else, so she's not allowed to marry a brother-in-law. If she does, it's an isa of karis, and the children are mamzerim. Also, that they actually behaved according to what they said. That's why they said they're scared. Eliyam they didn't carry out what they said. Am I coming, Messiah? What was he scared of? So what? Everyone followed Beis Hillel. So let's say Beis Shammai, who disagreed with Beis Hillel, will follow Beis Hillel. According to Beis Shammai, if you follow Beis Hillel, you're doing an avera, because she should be marrying her brother-in-law. Instead, she's marrying a stranger. So what is it? Sachak or lav? And if it's a lav, the kids are still all right. They're allowed to marry anybody they want. So if the kids are still all right, what was he scared of? When he named also, let's say Beshami followed Beis Hillel, my Messiah, what was he frightened of? Amar Rabbi Shua said, a mamzer ela mechayavi Mrs. Bezin. Rabbi Shua holds that it's a mamzer only from chayavi Mrs. Bezin. So there's no mamzer here. Even the halach is like Beis Hillel, and more than that. So the Gemara asks a question. The Gemara is answering back. So you're arguing that it was us. Right, you're arguing that definitely Beis Shammai followed their own opinion. So, according to what they did was that the tzara of the erva went ahead and married the brother, the yavam, and according to Beis Hillel, she's committing a sin of kares. But and the kids are mamzerim, and he's scared. But Rabbi Shua argues with what we learned before. We learned there's three opinions about mamzerim. One opinion is that even four opinions actually more exclusive. One opinion is that even if you're even asay, it's still mamzerim. One opinion is that if they're living in sin, a lav like Akiva, then you're mamzerim. And another opinion, which is the halacha, that if it's chayav a kares, what they're doing, it is a sin, the children mamzerim, incest and so on. And then Rabbi Shua says, only if it's a chayav Mrs. Bezin, only if you get punished by a bezin here, like a daughter, only if you get punished by a bezin, that's the only time that the children are kares. So that the tzara of, let's say, of an erva does not get Mrs. Bezin. If there's no Mrs. Bezin involved, then there's no kares. So the tzara, for example, of Achais Isha, there's no Mrs. Bezin there. So there's no kares. So what was he scared of? All it is a lav that committing a sin, and the children are all right. So the Gemara, when he named also, even if you want to learn that, it's also still don't explain my misyada and what was he scared of. Doesn't hold a mamzer Mrs. Bezin. So we're answering back. No, it makes sense because he named the mamzer lahavi. It makes sense that if, according to Beis Hillel, that if the tzara marries the yavam, they're committing a sin of kares. True, the children are not mamzerim, but the children cannot marry a kohen. Pogum milahave. They are pogum. The children cannot. If it's a girl, they cannot marry a kohen because they consider a pogum. If you committed a sin of kares, the child is a pogum and cannot marry a kohen. And if they were kohenim and the child, then becomes a chol. And how do I know that? But according to the Gemara here, we're going to learn. But if all they're doing was a lav, in other words, if Beis Shammai follows Hillel and she marries somebody outside, all they're doing is a lav, the children are not pogum to the kuna. Even though we just learned yesterday, Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri came up with this idea of having a chalitza, because he's saying here that if we don't do chalitza and everyone follows Beis Hillel, then according to Beis Shammai, the children are committing a lav and the children are pogum, can't marry a kohen. That's Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri. But the Gemara here holds, Rabbi Shua holds, that the child is not a pogum unless it comes from kares. Now, how do we know the child? Why should it affect the child? So the Gemara says as follows. And from a kal v'chayim, a very important kal v'chayim. So the Gemara, the kal v'chayim mamona, we learn out from mamona on a kohen god. Kohen god was not allowed to marry a widow. And what happens if a Kohen Gadol marries a widow? The child becomes affected. The child is a chol, and will consider the sin of a Kohen Gadol with a widow a very narrow sin because it doesn't affect anybody else except the Kohen Gadol. And we learned before that anything which is only limited to a certain group of people is a much weaker aveda. So nobody else has that issue. In fact, she's not married an ordinary Kohen, but not pogum, and yet we know that the child becomes pogum. Zu shenesra sheshava bekol, an avera that, let's say, that applies to everybody is, for example, the tzoras erba marries the yavam and she shouldn't have. That avera applies, doesn't matter if you Yisrael or whatever it is surely it affects the child. Says the Gemara. That's why he's saying, I'm scared. I'm scared because Beis Shammai did carry out their thoughts, and I'm scared because according to Beis Hillel, the children cannot marry kohanim, and therefore Reb Shua says, but thankfully they all followed Beis Hillel, and therefore the children are kosher to marry kohanim. There were families of kohanim gedolim. Says the Gemara, I understand. They asked the question, what do we do with the tzara of an error? In other words, should she marry the brother or should she marry a stranger? And he answered them, and he answered them about the children. And he says, as if the children, if they followed Beis Hillel, and if they followed Beis Hillel, there's only a law about the child pogum or not. And he said, no, they're not pogum. You have families of kohanim. There's no pogam if they married outside when they shouldn't have. But if they married the brother-in-law when they shouldn't have according to Hillel, then even though there's no mamzeh, they're definitely also kohanim. Says the truth is, Tatika Boim, that's two questions. Tzoros, first of all, asking regarding the Tzoros, and then the Intim Flavor Tzoros, as you want to tell me the Tzoros, Beis Hillel, that they follow Beis Hillel, that they did not marry the brother, they married outside. Tell me, what impact did that have on the kids? Bnei Tzoros, the Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai Mao. Since Beis Shammai says they're living in sin, alav, what about the kids? And he told them, and the kids, there's no pagam at all. L'maynav Kamina, L'mifshet, and what's Maynav Kamina? What's the difference? If the halach is like Beis Hillel, if that's the halacha, so what are you asking about the kids? The kids of a shul kasha, because halacha Beis Hillel. The nafkamina is the mifshet to resolve the question that we have. What about a vlad machzeg rishasa? Another case of a lav. We learned before that if you divorce your wife and she marries somebody else and then you take her back, you're committing a lav. What is effect on the new children? Do we say kal v'chayma? Do we apply to say kal v'chayma? The children cannot marry a kohen because it's almana, which is a limited window here. Any man who separates from his wife and she marries somebody else and comes back is forbidden. So therefore, the child should be pogum. Kuna ma'al mona kohen gadol she'eni should have called, but not pogum affects the child. Zushi should have called. Any should not pogum should affect everybody. Perhaps we can say ikim. We can ask. No, maybe the kal v'chayma does not extend to only a lav. And why is that? Ma'al mona, in case of a widow, shehi atzum is chalalos. In the case of a widow, she also is affected. If the Kohen Gadol dies tomorrow, she cannot marry a Kohen because she's called. She herself is a chalola. The Kohen cannot marry a chalola. No, it's not only she's affecting a child, she's affecting herself. Makes sense. She affects herself, she affects the child. In the case of if a married guy divorces his wife and then takes her back, over there, even though they're living in sin, she's not affected. Anyway, she cannot marry a Kohen. She's a divorcee. So it has no negative impact on her. If there's no negative impact on her, there's no negative impact on the child. In other words, it's the mother that's passing on the Isa to the child, but there's no Isa here on the mother. There's no word to be chal. She's already Asa to a kohen. So nothing was added on. It doesn't make her a halal or anything else. Therefore, the child itself is not pogum. Not like the Rabbi Yechon ben Churni yesterday, who wanted to say that the child is pogum. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri. Says the Gemara, he said, Tzoros ani misyade, b'nei tzoros ani meilachem. Tzoros, I'm not going to get involved there because I don't know who the Allah is. Because if I say follow Beis Hillel, that means that what Beis Shammai is doing is an Isser of Karas. They can get upset just for that. Forget about the kids. You're telling me that our psak is an Isser of Karas. They'll be upset. But b'nei tzoros, I can tell you that what, since everyone follows Beis Hillel, even if Shammai follows Beis Hillel, it doesn't impact on their kids. We'll go to just go quickly. Actually, we'll stop over here. Tomorrow, Gemara a little bit lighter, so